Okay, everyone, welcome to Topical Tuesdays with Critical Omissions, and thank you for joining us tonight. This is your host, Douglas Dwayne Dietrich, human weapon of mass instruction. Certainly glad to be here, and probably somewhat befuddled and somewhat disjointed in my communications because I have to prepare for tomorrow, which will be a very big day. Have a lot of bureaucracy to take care of with my manageress, Lorian and Fenton, and we will be having our own show tomorrow night on Lorian and Fenton's Mutual UFO Network program, which is on the other radio station that she works with. That will not be with Revolution Radio. That is going to be on the Inception Radio Network, I believe. And so do feel free to check their schedule for when Lorian and Fenton's Mutual UFO Network program, the MUFON program, is on. And then I'll be speaking for about 90 minutes with her, about an hour and a half, concerning Roswell and the Rising Sun. And for many of you, that will be ground that has been covered before. But for herself and her listenership, for herself, of course, she's intimately familiar with all of the details of Roswell and the Rising Sun, the DVD, what went into it, or at least she's familiar with a good deal of it. As my manageress, her relationship with me has been very professional and very detached, so there are a lot of painful, intimate details which, of course, I have not shared with her and which will probably be exposed to her as news just as much as they are to the listenership. Every time I speak to these subjects, something new comes out because such is the nature of personal experience and reality. Reality, of course, is a multi-layered affair of memories, and the most pronounced facts and memories that continually resurface tend to be those that are the most painful. And we certainly retain those in our minds with a clarity and a distinction that is almost impossible to manifest for the smaller details of our activities. And yet, if we're questioned about those activities or interrogated effectively enough, we can tell people things that we didn't even know we remembered. So keep this in mind. There's two things that when you work in the field of intelligence that every professional spy becomes very acquainted with. One is that you never really forget anything that is exposed to you. At some point, it is always conceivable that the potential is there. Someone can drag something out of you. The other is whatever you say, even if it is not consciously heard by someone else in a room, even if it is heard distorted, subliminally, even if that person is speaking to someone else and they unconsciously hear you speaking to someone else in a barely audible whisper, theoretically, they retain that. And that, too, can be drawn from them under proper interrogation and under proper questioning. So with professional interrogation techniques and research into psychology, we have managed to try to take interrogation out of the torture chamber and out of the dungeon and put it onto the psychiatrist's couch. This is where narcotics come in, which can be argued to be another form of torture, and certainly the Amnesty International and various other human rights organizations make a very cogent and valid argument that the application of mind-altering drugs to retrieve information is indeed a form of violation. It is invasive, most certainly, no one argues that. And might conceivably also be a form of torture and could ultimately do permanent damage to the subject. So we have that in mind when it comes to the vagaries and ethics of intelligence work, and as always, these are all part of the complexity of the human condition. Now, the reason I bring this up is, I think, an attempt to spend this particular broadcast addressing many questions concerning the intelligence warfare, but particularly psychic research in intelligence warfare, because when I was on Saturday Night Firing Lines, I had a gentleman call up who was extremely friendly and very positive personality, and he apparently had the impression that I was psychic. He was led to that impression apparently by other people. There was some kind of buzz or rumor going around amongst the internet that I myself might have been part of something similar to a remote viewing program. So he was questioning me about that, and I certainly tried to articulate the fact that I am personally not known, or I've never been recognized for any latent psychic talents. However, theoretically, of course, we all have them, and they can be drawn out. But the reality is that there are people who are born with pronounced talents as opposed to latent talents. And those are individuals that the intelligence community is most interested in. The intelligence community would break its bank trying to draw latent talents out of the likes of you, I, or the majority of the population. This is not to insult people out in the listenership who might very well manifest psychic talents that are not latent, that are blatant. So for those with blatant psychic talents, yes, you are the kinds of individuals or people who are going to be actively recruited by intelligence agencies if you were to admit to these talents. Now, there is usually a very big difference between someone who is making a living out of psychic abilities, quote unquote. The enormous amount of research that has been conducted at enormous expense by the United States government, Soviet government, many governments historically, the Third Reich, etc., have resulted in certain distinctions between charlatans and natural talents. And, of course, there are people who claim to have psychic ability who are extremely talented intuitives. And that is not necessarily psychic. Someone possessing intuition is possessing a very good common sense processor and a very good BS detector. Someone who has like their own ability to read faces and draw conclusions based on their understanding of human nature. Statistically, individuals who are the best in the world at telling when someone is telling the truth or whether they're lying or not would be police officers. Peace enforcement officers have spent their entire life contending with people who are telling them lies. And what peace officers tend to develop is an enormous ability to almost instantaneously, by someone's facial tics, facial manipulations, facial expressions, they can usually tell when someone is lying or when someone is telling the truth. This is why sometimes when you watch peace officers, police officers, approach a situation where it might look to a non-professional as if they are automatically taking sides. Now, don't get me wrong, I pointed out the concept of bad cops, and unfortunately, there are plenty of bad cops. I've made arguments many times against hiring military veterans as peace officers because of the almost impossible nature of transitioning someone from a military professional mindset to the mindset that's required for keeping the peace. They are opposite ends of the spectrum. To take someone from the training and the indoctrination that is required to make him a killer and turn him into someone entirely different, someone who is trying to keep a neighborhood from being too noisy. That's very dangerous, and our society has been very much put in danger by many of the military veterans who are in uniform. Are these the source of all bad cops? Of course not. And some of them may even have successfully made that transition, and they may even delude themselves into thinking that they made the transition with very little difficulty. But I assure you, it takes an enormous amount of work on the part of all of their compatriots and their staff to basically help them make that transition. Make no mistake about it, many modern, large, urban police departments have resident psychologists and psychiatrists. and which would mean some of the peace officers that you might be dealing with might even be on prescription drugs in terms of psychiatric issues that they're dealing with. And as someone who deals with psychiatric myself, someone who suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder and the symptoms thereof, I can assure you that this is not necessarily something that should be looked on as a negative. If someone needs something like that to function, then if they're able to function with that chemical aid, that is not a negative. The question is, do you want somebody on the police service in the first place that would need that? And so, again, part of the complexities of the adult world, part of the complexities of the situation that we are forever contending with as we try to maintain a working society. So when we confront intelligence work and the experiments into psychic powers, one of the distinctions that the intelligence communities make between someone with a truly latent ability and a charlatan, as they would consider it, would be someone who is claiming multiple talents. And that would mean someone who is claiming the ability to manifest changes in the world around him physically. It is bending spoons. Someone like Uri Geller is basically what would classically be defined as a telekinetic if he is truly bending the spoon, if he is not conducting just a parlor trick and using prestidigitation or legerdemain, the stage magic techniques that so many people use to basically simulate telekinesis. Now, if someone is in that position, they usually do not manifest an ability to read minds. They usually do not manifest an ability to be able to speak to the future. They usually do not manifest an ability to speak with the dead. And that is something that is very interesting and something that is acknowledged within the Soviet Union. So, as it used to exist, which was a state-sponsored atheistic culture. So that is something that we will go into. I forget his name. I do believe it's James von Prague. James von Prague is someone who speaks to the dead. That falls, believe it or not, into intelligence work, because the dead hold many secrets. And the dead, because they are able to share these secrets with the living, you can find intelligence that an agent who died was able to recover, and you can recover that intelligence from him even after he has been killed, if you are what is known as a thanatophage. And a thanatophager, or a thanatomancer, would be someone who is able to basically access the secrets of the dead. And so that is something that the Soviets investigated, that they trained people to manifest who displayed this latent ability, and it was extremely rare. Perhaps rarer still was the concept of the thanatophone, or someone who was able to manifest the talent of thanatophonics, which means that the dead could speak through him. Now, I believe that that is what James von Prague is manifesting. So those who do not consider James von Prague a charlatan, and there are actually very few who do when they have worked with James von Prague, he manifests what in the intelligence community would be exploited towards reasons of recovering the secrets from dead agents, or even from enemy agents if they switch sides in the afterlife. Now, think of how bizarre what I'm saying is in terms of your average thought processes. And you are now beginning to enter the world of high-level black operations, taken to a level which most people are totally unaware of in terms of its existence. By that I mean your average spy film does not take this into account. So you might say, how on earth would the Soviet Union, which was atheistic, come to the conclusion that one could communicate with the dead? One would assume that as atheists there would be no such thing as an afterlife. So I do want to get into the ideological, shall we say, contradiction and ultimately synthesis which they came to with their classical Marxian dialectic, without getting too academic about it and boring people to tears. The classic Marxian dialectic is, of course, based on the Hegelian, whose philosophy he basically stole. So the Hegelian dialectic, of course, is thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So Mao Zedong in the Chinese Communist regime would refer to this as contradiction, and these are brought to a resolution. And what the Soviets concluded was that there is what Christians or religious or spiritual people would refer to as a soul, but they viewed it as an imprint memory or a personality imprint on the physics of the universe.